Welcome to part 3 of the OCI session on Identity and Access Management, level 200. My name is KD. I am part of the product management team in OCI. In part 1 and 2 of this session, we covered some important topics. We discussed uh, instance principles and dynamic groups. And we also discussed how to set up multi-factor authentication with OCI. We discussed how to write advanced policies with very granular where conditions in them. If you have not seen those parts, I would highly recommend that you take some time to go over these important concepts. But what I'm going to cover in this part is identity federation with OCI. This is a separate topic. As long as you have basic understanding of the OCI IAM service, you should be okay without watching the first two parts as well. So I'm going to skip a few slides that I covered in parts 1 and 2. Again, instance principles and how they are important and how dynamic groups are created, how they work, and the certificates, how do you get those certificates, and how they are managed, uh, and multi-factor authentication, and the apps that we support, advanced policies, verbs and permissions, and where conditions. Uh, let's go to identity federation. All right, so enterprise companies almost always use an identity provider, also called IDP, to manage their user logins and passwords and to authenticate their users for access to secure websites, services, and other resources. And as you know, when you want to use any OCI resources via the OCI console, you need to sign in with a username and a password that your administrator provides to you. But your administrator can also federate with a supported IDP, which can be on premises or another cloud service, so that you and every employee in your company can use their existing logins and passwords and not have to create a brand new set of username, password, and credentials for OCI. And it is best practice to use your existing identity provider rather than creating brand new credentials for OCI. Uh, and OCI supports federation with the Oracle Identity Cloud Service, with Microsoft Active Directory through Active Directory Federation Service, or ADFS. We also support Microsoft Azure Active Directory as IDP for federation, and also Okta. In fact, other identity providers that support the SAML 2.0 protocol. So SAML is Security Assertion Markup Language. It's a standard that is quite popular. If your identity provider supports it, you can federate with OCI. In this session, I'm going to cover the basics of how to federate with Oracle Identity Cloud Service, Microsoft Active Directory, as well as the Azure Directory Services. But you can follow similar steps for other identity providers as well. Uh, and to federate, an administrator needs to go through a short process to set up a relationship between the identity provider and OCI. This is typically referred to as the Federation Trust. So you have IDP and then you have OCI. OCI in this relationship is called a service provider, or SP. Uh, After, we will look at a quick example of the kind of steps that need to be followed. But after that relationship is set up, any person in your company who goes to OCI console is prompted with that single sign-on experience that is provided by the IDP. and the user can sign in with the login password that they have already set up with the IDP. Uh, the IDP is then going to authenticate the user, and then the user is then able to access OCI. And when the administrator is setting up this trust, your administrator defines or it's already in place, right? You have groups in your identity provider in Active Directory, for example, and you know that there are groups in IAM or OCI IAM as well. Uh, so the administrator can essentially map each IDP group to similarly defined IAM group, and it's a best practice to have the mapping among a similarly defined IAM group in OCI, so that your company can reuse the IDP group definitions uh, and use the same definitions when authorizing user accesses to OCI resources as well. Uh, so if you have a IDP group for database admins, it's a good idea to have a similar data admins group in OCI as well, and to avoid any confusion and to keep things simple. Uh, and Oracle also recommends that you create a federation administrator group that maps to the administrator group in your IDP as well for similar reasons. The federation administrator group will have administrative privileges to in OCI to manage your tenancy while being governed by the same security policies as the IDP administrator group. Right. Let me actually. I was going to show it on slide 2, but let's look at what this can look like when you are actually trying to log into OCI. All right. So you go to Oracle cloud.oracle.com/sign-in. You will be brought to this page. You provide your tenancy name, whatever it is, because you can have accounts in multiple tenancies, or you can have multiple tenancies as well. So you provide that name, and if there is a federation already set up, you will get this message, right? You will be asked uh, to the option, you'll be provided with the option that for this tenancy, do you want to use your federated identity using the existing IDP? So you can continue and use your credentials. But if you can also, if you have a direct username passwords set up in OCI, then you will only see this kind of an option, and you can use those credentials. What this also means is that uh, you know you should set up at least for example for your administrator group, you can give them OCI credentials, and uh, or at least one username password in OCI uh, should be kept for a break glass kind of a situation in which you need to bypass the federation process and directly log into OCI with OCI username and password for scenarios such that you are not able to access some OCI resources using federated access, etc. Uh, any out of the ordinary kind of situations. If you do decide to set it up, it's a good idea. Then the you need to make sure that this password for this user or users, that it's not a human readable kind of a password. It is secured in a safe location, and probably a best practice to, or a good idea to make it one-time use. If you in a break glass kind of a situation, you have to log in directly outside of the federation identity uh, to uh, to change the password and get a brand new non-human memorizable password for the future. Uh, Another feature that might be useful to understand about is that if you federate with Oracle Identity Cloud Service or with Okta, you can leverage something called the system cross domain identity management, or SCIM, uh, to federate your users with OCI. Uh, if you federate the users with these identity providers, these through this process can have not just the username password to log into OCI console, but additional user credentials such as API keys and auth tokens that you can use uh, to make API calls directly to OCI resources, for example. And these tokens are managed in the user settings page. All right, so here I was going to show you that experience, but you already saw it. You can, if you have set up the federation using identity provider, you will be provided the option of a single sign-on using your existing IDP credentials. Uh, if you don't have it, or if you have your credentials outside of that, you will be using the username and passwords created specifically for your OCI account. All right. Oracle Identity Cloud Service, you can federate with it, as I said, and it's a recommended method, especially if you're using other Oracle cloud services, because Oracle Identity Cloud Service is the default identity provider for multiple Oracle services. Uh, so, using it allows you to have a seamless connection between these services without having to create a separate username and password for each one. So, it just makes it much more seamless. Uh, a quick note about Identity Cloud Service is that any tenancies created after December 2018 are automatically federated with the Identity Cloud Service and configured to provision federated users in OCI, and these users can have the API keys, auth tokens, etc. So, if this is the default methods for all the usernames and passwords that are created with OCI as well. So this is the default identity provider for OCI, and the newer accounts have federated users with SCIM. And tenancies created between December 2017 and December 2018 are also automatically federated with the Oracle Identity Cloud Service, but they are not configured to provision federated users in OCI with the additional credentials of API keys and auth tokens, etc. But you can still do a one-time upgrade so that such users can have API keys, auth tokens, etc. And now let's look at federation with Microsoft Active Directory. So setting up this federated trust is a one-time thing done by an admin. The steps are quite similar to how an admin would set up this federated trust with any relying party or the service provider, which is OCI in this case. The steps include going to your Active Directory Federation services and getting some information that you would need to set this up. This information includes a SAML document and the name of the uh, Active Directory groups that you want to map to OCI. Uh, and then you essentially need to add, on the OCI side. Let me actually show you in the console what this would actually look like. But it would be useful for all the detailed steps to go to this document that we have, and this document is going to give you all the steps in a lot of detail. Uh, but on the console, what you essentially need to do is go to identity and then federation. You obviously need to have the right privileges. Uh, but on the Active Directory side, they would ask you for XML document with the right metadata about OCI. So you can download this XML document right here, uh, and uh, and use it for configuration. Uh, but what you essentially do is you say, I want to add an identity provider. You give it a name and a description, and you choose what type it is. Again, it could be the Oracle Identity Cloud Service. As I said, it's a very good option, and it could be any other SAML 2.0 compliant identifier, identity provider, or the Microsoft Active Directory Federation service, or the Azure AD service as well. So you choose that, and from that provider, you would get a Federation metadata XML document that you would get from there, and you would just like you got the XML document for OCI, you would get a similar document from your IDP. You upload that document here. You choose some options related to uh, encryption, whether the SAML tokens are encrypted or not, and force authentication, which means even if there are active sessions for a user, do you still want the new sessions to get authenticated or not? And then the last option is authentication context is for the government customers. So what this essentially means is, this particular method of authentication is being followed on the IDP side. So when the SAML token comes from the identity provider with the authentication, then this kind of authentication should be included. That yes, this was done. If this is not included, OCI would return a 400 and not authenticate you. But this is the basic step. On OCI side, when you configure it, then it would ask you to map the group on the provider side with the groups on the OCI side. Uh, and after mapping these groups, you would then need to write the IAM policies for those groups, and then you will have uh, the sign-in URL that you can share with your users. All these steps are given in detail in the documents. So you follow these steps one time, and this would enable the setting up of the federation. Again, we have a Microsoft Azure Active Directory as well, right? That you can use. There is a link here, and it's similar kind of uh, process. You again download the federation metadata document from OCI, like I showed you. On the Azure AD side, you would set up OCI console as an enterprise application for simple SAML, basic SAML, single sign-on kind of enterprise application. This is where it says, you configure it for single sign-on. You provide the user attributes, set up the user attributes and claims, and this would essentially show Azure AD in this case uh, what kind of claim information would be sent from OCI side. Uh, After this, you would be able to get the SAML metadata document from Azure AD, and this is the metadata document that you put in the configuration page when you're setting up an identity provider, like I showed you. Uh, and then you on the identity provider Azure AD in this case, you assign the user groups that you want to this application, and then you set up the identity provider on OCI side, uh, and then after it's set up and you choose the options, etc., like I showed you. You do the mapping of the identity provider groups to the IAM groups on OCI side, and then you write the IAM policies for your groups, and then you will get the sign-in URL. And then it goes into everything in much more detail with pictures and all of that. Uh, and I talked about only two here, but it also talks about using Oracle Identity Cloud Service and how you can federate with it. And finally, for any SAML 2.0 protocol compliant uh, provider, it also gives you all these step. The basic premise is pretty much the same. The steps can vary a little bit, but you have to do similar kind of things in all places. So here is the table that shows the reference identity and access management model with for authentication and user management, including the options with federation that we just saw. Uh, you should definitely set up if you have existing identity provider that you are using. You should definitely use federation to federate into OCI so that you don't have to set up a fresh set of username passwords for all your users. If there is a human using the OCI console, use the federation methods, any of the methods that we looked at using Microsoft Active Directory, using Active Directory Federation Services, using Azure AD, using Oracle Identity Cloud Services, using Okta, or any SAML 2.0 compliant identity provider. Uh, and if it is some CLI or SDK kind of a call in which you need auth tokens or API signing keys, then you create your federation using Oracle Identity Cloud Service or Okta and enable the SCIM, the system for cross-domain identity management, so that you can have these user credentials, or you can directly set up an IAM user with an API signing key to be able to use the CLI or the SDKs. For your PaaS and SaaS applications, again, you can use any SAML 2.0 federation between your corporate identity provider and IAM. If you are using other PaaS and SaaS services along with OCI in Oracle, Oracle PaaS and SaaS services, then the Oracle Identity Cloud Service will make it quite seamless. So using it as an identity provider would be a good idea. If you need some credentials for your applications running in OCI instances, then you should use instance principles and dynamic groups. I'm not going to cover it here, but it's an important topic. It's covered in part 1 of this session. So please take a look there if you have not looked at that session earlier. But you should not configure your credentials and save them locally on your instances, because these credentials it's not secure to do it that way, and credential rotations and doing the audit calls on these credentials and tracking them becomes very difficult. So use instance principles, and we for software agents outside of OCI, you can create IAM users in OCI with API signing keys, and we already discussed the break glass access by a human user when federation fails or some resources can't be accessed through federation, etc. Then you should set up a contingency type IAM user in OCI in the default admins group, and uh, have a complicated non-human readable or memorable password which should be used once, and it should be rotated after that one-time use, and you fix any issues that you have. But the default should be in to use the federated access, and you should monitor non-federated access through the audit service, and keep a track of when the break glass thing was invoked. Uh, with that, let me wrap up this part in which we discussed identity federation with OCI, and what are some of the best practices that you should keep in mind. We also took a quick look at some of the steps you need to follow to set up this federation, or this federated trust relationship with OCI. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to having you join the next part of this session, in which I am going to go into some reference IAM model, and how to set up compartments in an enterprise environment.